Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Diener. I'm a furniture designer and I'm here to talk to you about developing your own design. It's quite a big task to take on, to design and build a piece of furniture, but quite a fun task. And I wanted to talk to you about some guidelines that I follow when I'm deciding to build and design a piece of furniture. Um, Once I've identified and analyzed my ideas, I set a goal. I I then start to do a bit of sketching and I start generating even more ideas. I might say I want to build a chair, and I set the goal of, okay, well, I want a new design, or do I want to reference some historical pieces? uh, then I start generating ideas and I just start sketching out good and bad. I select something that I like, I build a mock-up, and I start making changes in my mock-up phase, my model making phase and whatnot. I document it and then I evaluate it. And that process can happen several times over until I'm happy with what I want to actually work on. Now, I'll elaborate on a few aspects of my process with you as we go through this conversation with one another. But yeah, here we go. So, once we've gotten to the point where we have decided on an object, a chair, a table, a stool, um, I start to to make some sketches, which then inevitably lead to a scale model. Now my sketches are just pencil sketches. They're on a piece of paper. They don't have to be to scale. They don't have to be literal. They can just be very fluid. You move quickly through these ideas because it's important for you to keep all of it coming out and not getting stuck on, a joint or a specific aspect of the piece of furniture. And once you get a sense of what it's going to be, you start to take it into the scale model phase. Now, when I say scale model, I mean it has to be proportionately designed. You can do model size, which can be like a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 ratio, something that sits on your tabletop. Or you can do a mock-up, which is true to size, 1 to 1 ratio, out of some cheap material, some sort of cheap wood that you can move quickly through and not generate a lot of waste. This will help you, this will help you basically see it in real space and see if you can bring your sketch to life a little bit more clearly. Now, I personally like to go through the model making phase if it's going to be something that's a little bit more complex and large, where the mock-up would take a lot of time or take a lot of material. And if there's going to be a lot of curves or organic shaping or things that I'm not too sure about to begin and I really want to keep it small, I'll use foam core or just chunks of foam and carve away. Balsa wood, hot glue, MDF, very easy to shape and easy to maneuver materials. If I'm taking something into a mock-up stage, which is life size, sometimes I'll build the whole thing. Cheap wood, radiata pine, foam once again works really well. Plywood, inexpensive plywood, excuse me. That generally, for something that's pretty straightforward, or I'll do a section of it where I need to figure out how a corner comes together and there's a complicated joint there. I'll just focus on that corner and I'll recreate a leg, where it meets the table, where the two rails meet, what that detail is going to be like, whatnot, if I know it's going to be repeated around the like 4 sides of a table, for example. And once I've gotten my piece into that stage, I feel like I can take it into a full-scale drawing. Full-scale drawings, even though you have gone into the mock-up stage and you've had to figure out measurements and whatnot, the full-scale drawing is still yet another step of the design process that you get it into a two-dimensional surface, a big piece of paper, and you can get all the different views. You can do a top view from above, a side view, a view from the side as well. That will help you get your actual measurements figured out, and so you can move on to the next stage. Now, once you've decided what you're going to be making, you're going to need to figure out what kind of joinery you're going to use. Are you familiar with the variety of joints that are available to you? What's going to be strongest? What's going to actually look beautiful? You can hide the joinery and make the piece seem as if it's an illusion how it's coming together. That's actually quite a nice way to go about designing furniture. Or you can expose the joinery, which I quite like to do, because joinery is a beautiful thing. It's been developed over time into these beautiful, you really get a sense of how strong the piece is. You get a sense of the durability. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the most common joints out there and when they're used. What I didn't mention actually was that you can choose the wrong joint for the job, and you can compromise the stability of your piece, so you want to make sure that you don't do that. You also want to make sure that you can execute the joint easily over and over again. Say you have a table and you have rails that are coming together and you're doing some joints all around all four sides. You want to be able to mass produce those joints easily and not have to pay special attention to each one to make sure each one fits individually. Okay, so here are a few common joints that can be executed by hand or machine and their common uses. One of the most simple joints that we have is the butt joint. That's literally two long edges of the board coming together side by side. There's no interlocking features. Generally, the butt joint is what we use to join boards together. So say you have a narrow board and you want to make it wider, you would use a butt joint in that case. Then, getting a little bit more complex, are the half-lap joints. Those joints are very commonly seen in frame and panel construction. That's still a long grain joint with a connection with a shoulder, but a cabinet or a sideboard with a frame that has intersections maybe on 4 points. Half lap would be appropriate because it would lock those 4 sides together with the shoulder and the long grain, creating a nice rectangle. Another simple joint is the rabbet. You oftentimes see rabbets in the backs of boxes, or even for the 4 corner joints of boxes. If you don't feel like you need to get too complex with locking the corners together, you can use a rabbet. The rabbet is also nice just to receive another piece of wood, like in the back of your box. Like I was saying, it creates a nice lip for the material to rest on, and it also creates a nice glue surface for whatever piece of material you're resting against it. Then you get a little bit more complicated with maybe, say, the corners of things, finger joints and dovetails. Finger joints and dovetails are very similar, except for that finger joints don't have a flare or a locking mechanism like the dovetail does. So, and you can very easily do finger joints on your table saw, and dovetails are best done by hand, although now we have router bits and setups and jigs you can use on your table saw that make mass production of these joints very easy. The strongest of those two is definitely the dovetail. The dovetail has interlocking parts due to the triangulation and the flare of the joint. The miter joint is basically 45 degrees cut into the end of a board on two sides to make a 90-degree angle. Now, that is a perfectly fine joint to use in many regards. Framing, the sides of boxes, the edges of your table, whatnot. Most of the time, the miter joint needs reinforcement. You need to have either a spline or a key running through it, because essentially it's end grain versus meets end grain as a glue joint. So that's not a strong glue bond, and you need to have reinforcement. It's still a very beautiful joint. Most of the time it gives the illusion of two corners, or sorry, one corner, but two sides meeting to make this one corner. It gives the illusion of how, you don't really know how it actually comes together. It allows the grain to wrap around the corner. And a very common and strong and popular joint, the mortise and tenon joint. That's probably the most common joint you would see for most furniture construction: tables and rails, chairs, stools, anything where parts are coming together and creating a perpendicular, a 90-degree angle, I should say. A mortise and tenon. A mortise is the pocket, and the tenon is the protrusion, and it's male part entering a female part. It is the strongest next to the dovetail for furniture construction. So when you're choosing your joint, it's really important just to keep it simple. Stick with what has worked historically. Don't try and get too fancy when you're thinking up your joinery for your piece. While I do advocate for interesting joinery in your work, I don't think it's important to go beyond what woodworkers have figured out 1,000 years before you. We know that certain joints work in certain circumstances. We know that the strongest thing, for instance, when you're say for example you're cutting some dovetails, and you're trying to decide if more should be along the span or less, you have to figure out what works the best across that span, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be stronger if you add more. That's a good example. Make sure it fits properly. Make sure the work is clean. Make sure your surfaces are meeting, two flat surfaces are meeting next to one another. And if it's appropriate, show it off, like I was mentioning before. Exposed joinery can be the perfect addition to making your piece look beautiful. Now, the next important thing is choosing the right wood for the job. What are the properties of the wood? What kind of things are you looking for when you are building certain pieces? Where will it live? Is it going to be an outdoor piece? Is it going to be in your kitchen? Is it going to be in a wet environment? Is it going to be in a place where it's going to weather well? These are all things. Long-term wear, who's going to be using it? Is it meant for a child who's going to just destroy it? Or is it meant for someone who will be treating it like it's a prized object and hardly using it at all. There's all different circumstances that we find our furniture, their art pieces. So, and also, you can use 3 different, maybe your piece calls for 3 different types of wood because of the stability that you need for certain areas of your piece of furniture. So the first thing we look for is stability. Certain types of wood are stronger than others, and so because of that and because of their grain structure and whatnot, you might want to use one type of wood for the legs of a chair versus the seat of the chair versus the back of the chair. That is always an option, and like certain things will inform that decision. Like, you know, here for an example, one of the Windsor chairs that you see historically, usually the legs are a hardwood, so they're easy to turn on the lathe. They are really strong to hold the seat up. Usually the seat is made of a softer wood, easy to carve, soft on the body, it hugs the body well, and, excuse me, and the back, which is curved with a bunch of spindles, must be thin and tough and flexible. And so that would be 3 different species that would meet all of those needs. It's really important that when you're deciding on your piece of furniture that you look beyond what woods are fashionable at the time and try and make your decision based on some of the things I just mentioned. What's the stability of the piece you're making? What's aesthetically important? Because there are issues with just using the same wood for every single piece. There was a period of time when everybody wanted every piece of furniture made out of walnut, eastern walnut, North American growing tree, and you saw this huge influx of walnut work just out on the market. Everything was made out of walnut. It became harder to get. It became a higher priced lumber at the lumberyard. It slowly but surely has been over harvested and is no longer a sustainable material to use for furniture making. This has happened over the course of a short amount of time. It was casually used. It's always been a beautiful wood to use, casually used early on, maybe like in the 70s and 80s. Starting in the 90s and the 2000s, everybody has wanted walnut. Now it's probably fairly rare to find it and really expensive at the lumberyard, so it's no longer sustainable. What is the appearance of the wood that you are looking for? What is it that you are looking for in the features? Graphically, are you looking for contrast in your color? Are you looking for figure? Are you looking for a lot of chatoyance and light reflection? Are you looking for something that takes oil finishes easily? These are all considerations in your choices of material. I think one of the most important things is availability. Just like I was talking about walnut, I might think that there's a piece of furniture that would be perfect in walnut, yet I can't get it at the lumberyard, so I'm not just going to opt for whatever's available, but I'm going to take some other things into consideration, like stability and appearance and dimensions into consideration when I'm deciding. But sometimes you make a design based around what's available. That's a very common practice and not to be overlooked, actually, and not to be scowled, frowned upon either. It's a perfectly valid thing to do. And price. What is your client actually willing to pay? What are you willing to pay? And what is the price of, using this material? Is it sustainable? Does it come from is it a sustainable resource? Is it a rainforest wood that cost a lot of money, that it was difficult to get here? or is it something that was harvested locally, and you know, and there's plenty of it. And another thing that kind of falls into the availability category is dimension. Like I was saying, what's available, but I was also mentioning like what dimensions are available. If you have something that needs to be really thick and you can only find thinner dimensions of this material, do you want to build it up by gluing pieces together? Do you want to make your life easier and just go with a different species where you know that certain things are available and could be equally as beautiful? Those are your options. Now, these 3 points that I had mentioned, choosing the right joints for the job, being able to make a scale model, do a mock-up, and figuring out what the right material is for your piece is just the beginning of the design process, and probably one of the funnest parts. Once you figure out all of this, then you actually can start building and maybe even fine-tuning your design as you go along. But it's very important to set aside the time to go through these steps beforehand. It's very informative for you. It would, in the end, your piece will shine if you spend the time doing this. And you'll look forward to the process the more you go through it. Every time you do it, it'll be a different experience. So I hope that going forward you're going to build beautiful furniture. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you again soon.